These 3 pictures hide the most disturbing secrets. The girl in the back, smiling, is 4-year-old Heidi Jones. She is standing in front of a crime scene near the outline of a body. This is where she found her mother, Loretta, murdered, just days before this picture was taken. On July 30th, 1970, the same night Heidi's mother was killed, 10-year-old Lori Kulo was attacked by a man just 3 blocks away. When Lori screamed out for help, the man ran away in the direction of Loretta's house. August 31st, 1 month after the murder, a man named Tom Eagley was arrested after his affair with Loretta became known to the police. He was the only suspect in the investigation. 3 months later, Tom Eagley walked free. For more than 40 years, the circumstances in which Loretta Jones was murdered would remain a mystery, unless her daughter Heidi could solve her case, not yet knowing that the key to finding the killer was inside this picture all along.
They noticed that Loretta's hand was in a pool of blood.
I couldn't even imagine what she's thinking about as she's laying there dying. My mom taking her last dying breath, leaving the clues.
I said, that doesn't happen except in the movies. She says, it was right there, plain view.
Loretta writing the name of the killer in blood.
The year is 1970. Loretta is a single unwed mother who thrives to provide for her daughter, 4-year-old Heidi. They live a happy life together in their house of Price, Utah.
It was just my mom and I. She made a ton of my own clothes. She made me dolls. She made some good memories with me. For me, she was the best mom.
July 30th, 1970. It's a warm summer night. Heidi kisses her mom goodnight before going to bed, not knowing that this will be the last time she'll see her. July 31st, at 11:40 a.m., police are called to 468 East 4th Street. They find Loretta Jones, 23, murdered by stabbing. They learn that her only daughter, 4-year-old Heidi, is at the neighbor's house, terrified and alone.
The sheriff kept calling my mother, and finally my dad comes home and he's very upset and in shock. First thing that my mother said is, "Where is Heidi?"
While police pursue their investigation, Heidi is put in the care of her grandparents. With the killer still on the loose, Heidi is worried that he might come for her next, and so are the cops. As it turns out, there had been another attack the night before. This time, the victim was only 10 years old. At around 9:30 p.m., little Lori Kulo was attacked, only 3 blocks away from Loretta's house. Police are convinced the 2 crimes are connected, and the whole community of Price begins to worry about the safety of their own children.
A lot of the town was just scared that here's this guy that killed my sister, and he had grabbed a little girl that night as well. Everybody's wondering, where's this guy? What happened to him?
A few days later, Heidi finds herself at her mother's funeral, looking at her mom lying in the coffin.
She had on a blue dress. It had a super high collar, so that you couldn't see where her neck had been slit. But I remember looking at her in the coffin, and she looked just like Sleeping Beauty to me.
It was really hard to see Loretta, and there's her daughter, Heidi, just crying, realizing that her mother is gone now.
In the months that follow Loretta's murder, few arrests are made, and no suspect is ever convicted. 1971, 1 year after the murder of Heidi's mother, the case grows cold, with the killer still on the loose. As Heidi is growing up, one thought haunts her every night. She doesn't remember her mother screaming out for help or making any loud noises while she was being stabbed to death. Heidi understands there's only one explanation.
How somebody could not make a sound through any of that, not screaming out for help. She went through it because she didn't want anything to happen to me. How could I just let that go? My mom was my hero that night.
As she is living with her grandparents, Heidi feels she can't talk about her own mother anymore. She doesn't want to forget, but everyone tries to tell her to let it go.
I remember getting upset a lot, crying a lot. Anytime I tried to talk to my grandma about my mom, it would just make her cry. She said, "Why don't you just let it go?" And I said, "Because I can't let it go."
As the years pass, Heidi stays haunted by guilt that her mother's killer is still out there, and that no one is willing to bring justice to Loretta. She is compelled to take it into her own hands. But how?
I know she would have gone to great lengths to do whatever she needed to do for me, and she proved that the night she was murdered. I owed it to her to do something about this.
1989, Heidi turns 23, the same age her mother was when she was killed. Inspired by a TV show called Unsolved Mysteries, she begins a massive letter campaign, sending them to the Price City Police Department, to the Carbon County Sheriff, to the FBI, but none of them respond. Still, she persists to write letter after letter.
If I could keep the conversation alive about my mom, then maybe I could help get her case solved.
The years pass, with still no response from anyone. Almost 36 years, and still, the killer walks free. Approaching her 40th birthday, Heidi makes a bold decision: leave behind all she has and go back to her hometown of Price, Utah, with the sole intention of solving her mother's murder. There, she's confronted with her grandmother, pushing her to let it go.
My mom just wanted Loretta to rest in peace. I really honestly had mixed feelings, but the other part of me was like, where's this guy that killed Loretta?
2009, it's by chance that Heidi is reconnected with a childhood friend, David Brewer, who comments on one of her social media posts. This is how she learns David is a detective. Heidi tells David everything she can remember about that night.
Oh, I spilled my guts to him. I just needed help.
Her story begins on July 31st, 1970.
What I remember vividly is I heard a thud. I went to the bedroom door and I looked through the keyhole and I saw something laying on the floor. And at first I just thought it was a pile of laundry.
4-year-old Heidi pulls the door open, only to find her mother, Loretta, lying in a pool of blood. Heidi is in shock, unable to grasp the scene in front of her. She staggers out of the house in a hurry.
My next vivid memory is I am out on the front porch and my next door neighbor is out there digging for worms. Says, Heidi, come here, I have to show you something. And I says, I can't. I think my mommy's dead.
As David Brewer listens to Heidi's story, he can't believe he never knew about Loretta's murder, that Heidi never spoke of it at school.
Just for the child to see something like that with their own mother laying there, just is unimaginable.
I told him everything that I could possibly tell about my mom's case. I told him every rumor, every story.
Although Heidi expects David to turn her down because of the unlikelihood of the murder being solved, David is moved by Heidi's story. He can tell she's still very upset, even after all these years. Carbon County police officer David Brewer reopens the case of Loretta Jones' 1970 murder. His first step is to review the original case files, but immediately, David is confronted with a serious roadblock that threatens to stop the investigation altogether. The case files no longer exist.
I quickly found out that I had no evidence and no case file at all, which is uncommon because homicides you keep for life.
Apart from old newspaper clippings, David gets his hands on written testimonies of the first responders on the scene of Loretta's murder.
They found Loretta laying on her side with her hand in a pool of blood. Them and the doctor witnessed 17 stab wounds in her back and 2 in her chest.
The first responders found no sign of forced entry. This may indicate that Loretta knew her killer. Detective Brewer then makes another shocking discovery. It seems that, according to the medical examiner, Loretta didn't fight back.
Someone being stabbed multiple times would definitely show defensive wounds in the typical case.
The question is stunning. Why wouldn't Loretta have fought for her life?
I believe that Loretta stayed quiet to protect her own child because she was afraid that her daughter would run out and get hurt as well.
Although Brewer now has details about the crime, he still has no evidence from the crime scene and no lead on the suspect. The likelihood of solving this case is close to none. David goes to face Heidi empty-handed. Without any forensic evidence, there's little more he can do.
David said to me, too bad we don't have any photos of the crime scene.
Right away, Heidi is reminded of a box of belongings her grandma had kept all those years. Inside, she had put anything that concerned the murder of her daughter. The most striking item is a photo of Heidi, standing near the outline of her mother's body.
Why are they taking a picture of her right there, where her mom died like that? The blood stain was still there, but this picture is the only crime scene photo we have.
Along with the photo is a newspaper cutout of a man named Tom Eagley, accompanied by a police officer. As David understands it, Tom was the only suspect in the murder case. He spent 3 months in jail awaiting trial, but was set free by the judge because of a lack of incriminating evidence.
The judge kicked it out of the preliminary hearing stage.
Tom Eagley just happened to be a guy at the wrong place at the wrong time walking around.
While looking into the other newspaper clippings, David makes a shocking discovery. On the night Loretta was murdered, there was an attempted kidnapping only 3 blocks away. David Brewer knows this can't be a coincidence. It is likely the crime was committed by the same man that killed Loretta Jones. July 30th, 1970, at around 9:30 p.m., Lori Kulo and her brother are riding their bikes in front of their house. As it's starting to get dark, Lori realizes that her brother already went inside. As she quickly decides to go in herself, Lori drops her bike and walks toward the door, but she isn't alone. Just before reaching the safety of her home, a man attacks. He puts a hand against her mouth, preventing her from screaming. While she desperately tries to get away, the man's hand slips from her mouth long enough for Lori to scream out for help. According to Lori's testimony, the man ran away in the direction of Loretta's house. Detective Brewer knows Lori saw the killer that night. He has to get in touch with her. She's the best chance he has to find a proper suspect. At the same time, Heidi makes a most shocking discovery while checking into her grandmother's box. She finds a journal book in which her grandma documented every single thing 4-year-old Heidi said after that fateful night. The first entry was written on the same night Loretta was found dead.
Heidi said it was Tom that killed my mom. It sounds like Tom. I had a bad dream. I heard footsteps, and he said, "I'm coming to kill you. When I'm through with you, maybe your daughter too." I heard a thud, a noise. Mommy fell. She was dead. I seen him through the hole in my door, that being my keyhole. Why did that Tom kill Mommy? He always slapped her, hitting her. He was mean to Mommy. It was such a horrendous time in my life, and to know that I was there and I witnessed a whole lot more than I actually remember.
The long absent memories resurface as Heidi reads, and she finally recalls the last thing her mother said to her.
That night, my mom came to my bedroom and she told me, "Don't come out."
The words are striking. To think that Loretta knew something bad might happen, and still she wanted to protect her child. As Heidi can't remember anything more about the man she called Tom, David Brewer goes forward and meets with Lori Kulo, the girl that was attacked on the same night Loretta was murdered. His best lead would be her description of the man she saw that night.
Brown hair, lighter eyes, like 5'10", 5'11", something like that. He wasn't real tall, but he wasn't short.
As Lori describes her version of the events to David, one detail catches his attention. Lori was later called in by police to identify the suspect.
When we got to the police station, they had me kind of peek around the corner and look at him, and they asked, "Is that the guy?" I felt like I was going to throw up, and I said yes.
Lori identifies her attacker out of a lineup. The man's name? Tom Eagley, the same man that was arrested back in 1970.
I knew that Loretta had dated Tom Eagley one time on a blind date. She didn't like him, and she didn't want anything to do with this guy. Heidi was always right to the same story every time. Tom killed my mom.
While he is sure to have the right suspect, Detective Brewer knows he doesn't have enough evidence to convince a judge for a trial, and if he can't get a confession, his only option would be a DNA sample. While consulting with forensic experts and other qualified detectives, David Brewer is given a crazy idea. If he's going to find DNA evidence, it can only be found in one place: Loretta's body. The thought of exhuming the remains of Loretta is troubling. Still, David calls up Heidi to ask for her permission, as they are both running out of options.
Give me the shovel, I'll help dig. Because if that's what it's gonna take, I will do it. I will do whatever I had to do.
Investigators in Carbon County say they are closer than ever to figuring out who raped and killed a young mother nearly 5 decades ago.
I would hope that nobody ever has to exhume their own mother.
It's June 2016. On the day Loretta Jones' body is exhumed, Heidi melts down. In her head, it's as if she's losing her mother all over again, but everything depends on the result of this exhumation. The process is highly publicized, and the parties involved make sure the news will reach Tom Eagley's home. David Brewer gets a call from a friend of the Jones family. Someone saw the exhumation on TV.
She says, "Hey, I got some info for you that you might just find interesting." did you ever know that Loretta wrote the killer's name in blood? And I says, how would you know this anyway? I mean, she says, I was living with Heidi's grandmother at the time, going to school. She says, I saw it right there with my own eyes. We got one crime scene picture back. We looked, and with a little bit of color manipulation on this photo, it is there, plain as day. She writes this T and this O.
I never heard that. I was beyond excited. I mean, my mom taking her last dying breath, writing out T and O, leaving the clues.
46 years ago, Loretta made sure her murder would be solved, and yet she has never gotten the justice she deserved. To Heidi, it's now more important than ever that Tom Eagley gets put behind bars. Everything hangs on the results of the exhumation. However, when the lab results come back, they are struck by the worst news ever. No trace of DNA has been found. Although their plan has failed, on television, they play it cool. Their last chance is Plan B, the bluff.
There are new things just come to light, and things that didn't make sense maybe a year ago make sense now.
The idea is to make Eagley think they did find something and see how he'll react.
Hendricks said it's still too soon to publicly name the individual that investigators are looking at for this crime. He did tell me that person is still alive and that detectives are actively working to arrest and prosecute him.
Finally, a breakthrough. A woman calls, claiming she knows Tom Eagley as her neighbor and that he came to her for help following the exhumation.
Tom came to her house and says, hey, can you watch my dogs? The cops are going to come for me really soon.
They arranged for the woman to record her conversations with Eagley, but never expected her to get a full confession.
Were you drunk?
I was drunk, yeah.
And the door closed, and then what?
I was thrown down for sex.
Okay. And that made you feel how?
Like I lost it. I cut her throat, and I left.
He did it. He really did it. After all these years, he finally confessed.
Words can't describe what it was like. It says, we got your guy. Your mom can rest now.
A 76-year-old man is on his way to prison for a murder he committed in Carbon County back in 1970.
I can't believe this. I can't believe this day is finally here. In my impact statement, I told Eagley how he took my mom away from me. She missed me dating. She missed me getting my driver's license. She missed me getting married. She missed out on everything in my life.
It's the end of a long road for Heidi Jones-Asay. This afternoon, Eagley was sentenced to 10 years to life behind bars for that crime.
He will be 96 years old when he goes out before the parole board, and I will make sure he doesn't get out. People say it's closure, but for me, it wasn't closure. It was justice. I don't even know how to put into words what David Brewer means to me.
Her persistence. I honestly think there were times that she lifted me up. Without her pushing me along and giving me that support, I don't think it would have been solved.
Some heroes wear capes, mine wears Kevlar. Yeah, he's my hero. My mom mattered. My mom's life mattered. She mattered to me the most. For me, it's all been about never give up. Never give up. As long as there's hope, there's a chance. I learned to believe in the impossible.
This has been such a big part of Jones-Asay's life. She says she's not sure what she's going to do now. She says simply, she's going to keep her mother's memory alive.
This picture hides the most disturbing secret. It was taken in the Bahamas on November 16, 1961. The girl sitting on the lifeboat is 11-year-old Tere Jo Duperrault. She was found by a cargo ship after spending 4 days alone in the ocean with no food or water. Minutes after the picture was taken, she collapsed from exhaustion and heart failure. 3 days earlier, on November 13th at 12:35 p.m., a man was found aboard a dinghy, waving frantically to a nearby ship. He identified himself as Julian Harvey, captain of the Bluebell ship. He told authorities the ship had sunk after a violent storm, and he was the only survivor. 3 days later, while Captain Harvey was being questioned by the Coast Guard, he overheard that Tere Jo Duperrault had been rescued. The next morning, Julian Harvey was found dead in his room. The events that sank the Bluebell ship would remain a mystery unless, by some miracle, doctors could save its remaining survivor, the 11-year-old girl the world has come to know as the Sea Orphan.
Has she been conscious at all since?
That I don't know. I couldn't say, sir.
Was she unconscious when she was brought in?
Yes, sir. She's out now, I believe.
She was in full shock when she got here.
What's her condition?
Serious, but I think she'll be all right. I think she'll live.
Behind these windows of Mercy Hospital overlooking Biscayne Bay lies little Tere Jo Duperrault, still recovering from her ordeal aboard the Ketch Bluebell.
What were her first words?
Her name.
She said anything else?
No words.
Is there any indication that there might be somebody else out there?
Well, there's always possibility wherever there's hope, and we certainly have hope the search is going to continue.
The year is 1961. 11-year-old Tere Jo lives a happy life with her loving family, her father Arthur, her mother Jean, her brother Brian, and her baby sister Renee. Arthur, a successful optometrist, always dreamed of taking his entire family for a cruise across the world. He charters a 60-foot-long twin-masted sailing ketch to make the trip from Fort Lauderdale to the Bahamas. While unable to navigate it himself, he hires a captain, a former World War II fighter pilot named Julian Harvey, who agrees to the trip as he can take his wife Mary Dean along with him. It's November 8th, 1961, in the port of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. The Duperrault family sails out with Captain Harvey at the helm of the ship called the Bluebell. They spend several days exploring Caribbean islands, the children enjoying their share of snorkeling in the neighboring waters. November 12th, the family decides to make the trip back to Florida at night, excited about this new experience. In the early hours of the evening, Tere Jo makes her way down to the cabin she shares with her sister. The rest of the family stays upstairs, the children napping, the adults enjoying the last moments of their vacation. It's November 13th, the following day. At approximately 12:35 p.m., a crew member aboard the oil tanker called the Gulf Lion sees a man waving frantically from a dinghy. The man yells the words, "Help, I have a dead baby on board." As the ship crew pulls the man aboard, they notice the deceased body of a red-haired young girl wearing a life jacket, laying on the floor of the dinghy. The man identifies himself as Julian Harvey. He explains that at approximately 8:30 p.m. the previous evening, the Bluebell ship was hit by a strong squall, causing the ship to keel over and the main mast to snap. He was then separated from all other members on board and was forced to abandon the sinking ship. He was unable to save any of the members, including his wife, Mary Dean. His depiction of the events are thorough and leaves little room for doubt that this is what really happened. The problem is, Julian Harvey is lying. For the next 3 days, rescue missions are sent across the sea to the area Harvey claims the ship has sunk, hoping to find other survivors, to no avail. On November 15th, Harvey is allowed to return to Miami for further questioning by the U.S. Coast Guard. It's November 17th, 5 days after the Bluebell sank. Midway through Julian Harvey's interrogation, a captain runs into the room and says, "There's a survivor." When hearing the words, Captain Harvey yells out, "Oh my God," before quickly calming himself to say, "Isn't that wonderful?" His behavior then changes drastically, as he asks to be excused from the interrogation, under the pretext of being tired and wishing to speak with his deceased wife's family. After leaving the interrogation office, Harvey drives a short distance on Biscayne Boulevard before checking in to the Sandman Motel under a fake name. The next morning, a maid walks in to find him dead in his room.
Do you think of any reason why he would do it, or what he did?
None other than that I have known him for these many years, and I think that he had found the dream girl of his life, and since he's been back, and since I picked him up at the airport, I would say that he has been in a very deep state of shock. And I think that he was still in that condition and possibly had never come out of it until the time of his death.
In a hospital bed only 7 miles away, little Tere Jo Duperrault is in a coma, recovering from her ordeal at sea, while her rescue makes the front page across the country. The sudden death of Julian Harvey raises more questions than answers about what could have happened on the night the Bluebell sank. Everyone awaits for Tere Jo to wake up and share her side of the story. It's November 20th, when finally the truth unravels. Tere Jo is awake and ready to talk. Her story begins on the night of November 12th.
I was awakened by my brother screaming, and it was the type of a scream that it set me on edge. I knew something terrible had happened.
She hears the words, "Help, Daddy, help." Then, silence. Alone in her room, she finds courage to walk up to the main deck, but nothing can prepare her for what she's about to find.
As I came out here in the kitchen, my mother and brother were lying there, and there was a big pool of blood.
I think I went into shock because I didn't go and touch them, and I think I knew they were dead.
Unable to look at her mother and brother any longer, she continues to walk toward the upper level, hoping to find her father, when she's met by a crazy-eyed Julian Harvey. She asks him what happened, but instead of answering, he shoves her down the ladder, yelling at her to get back down to her room.
I was very trusting, and I thought that something bad had happened and that he didn't want me to see what had happened.
Terrified of what she just saw, Tere Jo sits on her bed, waiting, when all of a sudden, she notices water coming into her cabin. Fear turns into panic as she becomes aware that the boat is sinking. Before she can have any sort of reaction, Harvey comes into her room, a rifle in his hands. He doesn't say a single word. He just looks at her with madness in his eyes. Then, he walks away.
He didn't kill Tere Jo because he knew the boat was sinking. She was a goner.
Tere Jo continues to wait in her room while it is quickly filling up with water. She's afraid of what she might find if she dares go back up, but she might not have any other choice.
I decided that I couldn't stay there any longer because the water was making my mattress float, so I waded through and I went on top of the deck again.
When she finally reaches the main deck, she sees Captain Harvey setting the dinghy down into the water. She dares to ask him if the boat is sinking. Again, he doesn't answer. Harvey then dives into the pitch-black sea and catches on to the dinghy that's floating away. Tere Jo is now alone, the Bluebell nearly fully sunk, and the only living soul around has disappeared into the night.
Tere Jo somehow had the presence of mind to remember that there was a life float lashed to the deck.
I knew the boat was going down, and it was do this or die. I scrambled over the sails to the top of the deck where I knew a cork raft was, untied it, threw it over the side, and got in it.
By the time Tere Jo makes it onto the cork raft, the boat is gone. But the rope that tied the raft on board is still attached to the sunken ship, threatening to pull her under unless she can untie it in time. She scrambles in the darkness, unable to see anything. She does her best to find the knots with her fingers and pull at the wet string with her nails. Just as the rope begins to pull her raft underwater, she succeeds, freeing herself from the Bluebell.
I huddled in this raft, and it was very dark, and I was motionless and silent, and I just stayed that way and stayed that way. It finally dawned on me that there was something evil about Captain Harvey, and I was very fearful that he would find me.
Floating alone into darkness, she refrains from screaming out for help, worried of what Captain Harvey might do if he found her. So she sits and waits, not making a sound, waiting for morning to come. When the sun finally rises, she's relieved to find that she's all alone and Harvey is nowhere in sight, but all she can see is water in every direction. November 13th, Tere Jo Duperrault sits on her life float, her legs dangling in the water.
I was sitting in this cork raft, and the bottom was interlaced rope, and the only position I could be in was sitting. And the parrotfish started picking at me through the rope.
Her feet are bleeding, but there's nothing she can do about it. As the hours pass, the sun quickly becomes a threat as well, burning her skin for hours on end. With no water or food, she starts to think she might not last for very long. She focuses on trying to spot any ship or plane on the horizon. Hopefully someone is aware the ship has gone down, and by some miracle, they'll send help to save her. When the night comes, Tere Jo has to stay sitting, and though she tries to stay awake, she's exhausted, and her mind drifts in and out of consciousness.
I had a dream that I could see the blue lights of an airport, the landing strip, and I could see that my parents were waiting for me at the end of the landing strip. I was going to meet them. I jumped out of the raft, and jumping out of the raft awakened me, and fortunately I hadn't let go, and I scrambled back in.
She realizes that it's dangerous to sleep. If she loses the raft, she's as good as dead. November 14th, as the dawn breaks, she sees a small red plane circling overhead. She starts to get excited, convinced that she'll finally be rescued. But there's just one problem.
The life raft that she was able to get off of the Bluebell was white. Wave caps are white. And it was just impossible to see this little white oval thing bouncing around on the ocean surrounded by these white waves.
There was a red search plane that came so close to me I could almost reach up and grab it. I took my blouse off and I waved it thinking, and I was screaming and thinking that, I'm here. Don't you see me?
The plane comes around and dives just above her head, close enough that she can see the details on the underside. She's convinced that the plane will come to her rescue.
They flew off, and it was very disheartening.
When she spots a ship on the horizon, she starts to paddle with her hands and feet, but it becomes clear to her that she could never reach it in time. Her hope fades with every ship she sees. November 16th, Tere Jo has been holding on to life in her cork raft for 4 days and nights. She no longer hopes when she sees a boat or plane. She just sits, her mind drifting off. Her lips are swollen and dry, her body aches all over. Her skin feels like it caught fire. She stares ahead, not paying much attention to the ships that, like all the others before, have come and went. The truth is, she's losing consciousness.
A Greek freighter was going through the Providence Channel in the Bahamas, and one of the men on deck, he was looking out across the sea that was covered with whitecaps, but he noticed in the distance one whitecap that didn't seem to disappear.
The man in the lookout spotted me with his binoculars, and at first thought that I was a fisherman, and then realized that a fisherman wouldn't be out in such a little boat.
It must have seemed like something completely unreal because she was almost in a coma at that point in time.
I was almost dead from exposure and dehydration. My heart rate was irregular. My kidneys weren't working. So I was near death.
Has she been conscious at all since?
That I don't know. I couldn't say, sir.
Was she unconscious when she was brought in?
Yes, sir. She's out now, I believe.
Behind these windows of Mercy Hospital overlooking Biscayne Bay lies little Tere Jo Duperrault, still recovering from her ordeal aboard the Ketch Bluebell.
She was in full shock when she got here.
What were her first words?
Her name.
Just her name. She said anything else?
Say anything? No word.
Express any feeling? Any pain?
Vibrating. No legs.
What's her condition?
Serious, but I think she'll be all right. I think she'll live.
It's November 20th. Tere Jo Duperrault has just delivered her testimony to the investigators from her hospital bed. She confirmed that everything Captain Harvey said about the events has been a lie.
It is concluded that the Ketch Bluebell was intentionally scuttled. It is further concluded that Arthur Duperrault, Jean Duperrault, Brian Duperrault, and Mary Jordan Harvey lost their lives at the hands of Julian A. Harvey prior to the sinking of the vessel. The exact nature of the circumstances whereby these lives were lost, or the order in which they perished, cannot be ascertained. It is further concluded that the motives for the acts of Julian A. Harvey cannot be ascertained. However, the fact that he was the sole beneficiary of his wife's insurance policy and that he was sorely in need of funds must be considered.
When looking into Julian Harvey's past, it becomes plausible that he had done that before. His record showed a history of insurance fraud, boats sunk or burned, of airplanes crashed, and, worst of all, his ex-wife being killed in an automobile accident. Although the details surrounding the deaths of the Duperrault family remain unknown, the investigation shows that it is likely Julian Harvey was in the process of killing his wife when he was caught by either Arthur or Jean Duperrault. Harvey then decided to kill everyone on board and sink the ship to hide his crime. What he didn't take into account was for little 11-year-old Tere Jo to survive alone at sea and ruin his devious plan.
What was Tere Jo's attitude during the interview?
She was very composed. I was surprised at the amount of fortitude and courage that she has shown throughout. We asked her several times if she was getting tired and wanted to stop, but she said no. She answered all questions in a very frank and forthright and honest manner. She is quite a young lady.
Tere Jo is safe, but the girl whom the world has come to know as the Sea Orphan has lost her entire family. Her aunt and uncle take her in, treating Tere Jo as if she was their own daughter.
I love my aunt and uncle dearly, and to this day, they're my parents. But at that time, I never wanted to let go of my mom and dad, and so growing up, it was very difficult. I didn't believe my father was dead because I had not seen him. I would just pick up and leave on a whim. So I would drive to like North Carolina Beach looking for my dad. I was always searching. I did that for many, many years until I was about 35, then I accepted it finally.
All her adult life, Tere Jo has been attracted by the water, working to help regulation and zoning. Even after all her trauma, she still feels a strong bond between her and the sea. She says she wants to protect the ocean because the ocean saved her as a child. It's also her way of feeling connected with her family.
It's a testimony to the strength of the human will and the human spirit. It's a morality tale. It's a story of more than surviving. It's a story of the power of evil, but the refusal of the human spirit to be dominated by evil.
If you're put in a situation that is challenging, you have to adapt to whatever the circumstances are and go with the flow. And I think that anybody that does this can survive.
I'm so fortunate that I had my family. I hope that I can just continue to be healthy and happy and, have the wonderful love that I share with my family and friends.
It took years for her to recover from her ordeal at sea, but today, Tere Jo has become a beacon of hope for survivors everywhere. She is living proof that even after tragedy, there's a life worth living. This picture hides the most disturbing secret. It was taken in Guyana on November 18, 1978. 5 people were shot dead, including a woman named Tracy Parks. During the attack, her daughter Tracy went missing in the forest, along with 4 other kids. 1 hour earlier, this footage shows the airstrip minutes before the attack. The woman with the red coat around her waist is Patricia. Her daughter Tracy has already boarded this smaller plane. The final images capture these 3 men with guns on the right. 3 hours earlier, the camera captures 12-year-old Tracy wiping tears with her hat. As the Parks family are packing their belongings onto the truck, people from the commune show their anger, yelling at them.
You bring those kids back here! Don't you touch my kids!
24 hours after this footage was taken, 918 people are found dead, and Tracy is nowhere to be found. The events that led to the Jonestown massacre would remain a mystery, unless, by some miracle, someone can rescue its youngest survivor, 12-year-old Tracy Parks.
Today, the Jonestown story got much worse.
910 died in the poison ritual of the People's Temple.
They shot the reporters on the ground, the congressman.
It's just nothing we can do to protect ourselves or to get anybody else out of there,
The possibility that children are alive has faded to very little chance at all.
We have no positive indication here that there are people out there wandering through the jungle.
Other relatives will not be satisfied until there has been a thorough aerial search of the jungle of northwest Guyana.
The year is 1966. In the quiet town of Redwood Valley, California, Gerald Parks moves in with his loving family. Worried about the Cold War and a possible nuclear disaster, Parks and his wife Patricia have driven all the way from Ohio with their 3 kids, their son Dale, their daughter Brenda, and their 6-week-old baby girl, Tracy. The Parks are among the hundreds of people who followed Reverend Jones to California. Redwood Valley is to be the perfect shelter for Gerald and his family, a great place to raise little Tracy. 1973, 7 years later, Jones announces that he's building a paradise city in South America. He calls it the People's Temple Agricultural Project, but it will later be known only as Jonestown. This is to be the promised land, but contrary to Gerald and Patricia, Tracy is not at all excited. August 1st, 1977, an article is published in New West magazine condemning the People's Temple, talking about allegations of abuse. Still, more and more followers of Reverend Jones make the move to this so-called Paradise City. Families left behind are worried about loved ones. Months pass, and no one's heard from the Parks family since they left. November 17th, 1978, Senator Leo Ryan from California flies to Guyana with his legal aid and the NBC camera crew to investigate.
The word we were getting was that there was an armed encampment.
His goal was simply to go there and try to determine if people were being held against their will, and if so, to try to get them out of there.
The entire trip to the city of Jonestown is documented on tape. The images you see here will later be found abandoned on this Guyana airstrip.
I'm from the United States government. We're here to inquire into the health and the welfare of American citizens who are here.
As he arrives at the camp, Leo Ryan is met with an unexpected scene. Cheerful children playing and smiling, adults in colorful clothing, dancing and singing.
How could you not be impressed that out of the jungles of Guyana, they had carved out a community?
Rice, black-eyed peas, more peas. You have different containers around the place. Couldn't go through all the tremendous inventory. They built up Kool-Aid.
At first glance, Jonestown really does look like a great place to live.
Oh, it's really nice here. We're going on a scouting mission to get some barrels along with the leaves.
They really love it here in Jonestown, as you can see.
But something floats in the air, something hidden behind the eyes. Are all these people really happy?
Some people have said they couldn't leave if they wanted to. Do you think you could?
Yeah, if I really wanted to, I'm free to go. If I was really wanted to, I'd be able to free to go. Well, I believe it. I've been here a few days, and I have absolutely no complaints at all. It is really nice here.
When evening comes, the townsfolk have prepared a celebration for the senator.
It was a vibrant community. I would never have imagined that something was very, very wrong.
I think that all of you know that I'm here to find out more about. Questions have been raised about your operation here. But I can tell you right now that from the few conversations I've had with some of the folks here already this evening, that whatever the comments are, there are some people here who believe that this is the best thing that ever happened to them in their whole life.
But behind this cheerful demonstration hides a disturbing reality. As one of the journalists passes along the pavilion, a man secretly hands him a note. The note reads, "Help us get out of Jonestown." November 18th, the following day, at 11:30 a.m., Gerald's mother, Edith Parks, walks up to Senator Ryan directly and says, "We're being held prisoner here." Taken aback, Senator Ryan asks Gerald if what his mother says is true.
I said, "We've been here 7.5 months. We want to go home."
No one can imagine the horror Gerald and his family went through, but the next 72 hours will be the worst 12-year-old Tracy will ever live. Tracy's story begins in Redwood Valley, years earlier.
I think that my dad just truly believed that Jim Jones was a good man in the beginning.
Being born in the People's Temple, Tracy has been taught her whole life that Jim Jones is a man chosen by God.
Come forth, my dear. Stand up. Take that step. Bless your heart. Take that step.
At one gathering, he asks a woman in a wheelchair to stand up. As she slowly begins to rise, the crowd is overcome with emotion. Then, he asks her to walk.
Move forward. Move forward, darling. You can do it.
Step after step, he asks her to move towards him. Until...
When I saw it with my own eyes, I thought, how can I deny it, you know?
What Gerald doesn't know at the time is that the woman in the wheelchair, who stood and walked among the crowd, was actually one of Jones' secretaries, hired for the spectacle.
My personal feelings with Jim Jones were always good ones. I always thought he was handsome. Just watching him, I would just be mesmerized.
Some people see a great deal of God in my body. They see Christ in me, a hope of glory.
But when I got old enough to realize the difference between good and bad, I noticed that all of the meetings weren't happy meetings.
Every Wednesday, Jim Jones offers a different kind of meeting to his followers. He calls them catharsis, the purging of evil.
If you got caught talking to people that were not affiliated with the church, then you would be in trouble for that.
Members, even children, could be called to the front and be hit repeatedly with a paddle, while the entire congregation is made to laugh at you.
I would find myself looking around at all the adults, thinking to myself, you can't think this is okay. You just can't. I was scared to do anything wrong because I was scared I was going to be called up and be beaten.
As the Parks family is getting ready to follow Jim Jones to Guyana, Tracy is deeply troubled.
I can't figure out for the life of me why my parents went when the red flags were here.
I want to give you more than I have. I want you to be greater than I am. And if you don't want to go this route, then go to hell where you want to, but don't bother me.
I remember landing in a little plane on the Port Kaituma airstrip that's not very far from Jonestown.
As Tracy gets off the plane with her family, the air is so thick and so hot, she can hardly breathe. The family now has to board a tractor to be taken to Jonestown.
When we came up on them gates, they were standing there with guns. And at that moment, I knew I had just entered the gates of hell.
I said, I feel like I'm making the biggest mistake of my life.
Right away, Tracy and her family are stripped from all of their belongings, including their passports. Then, Tracy is separated from her parents.
They told my parents right then and there, she's gonna be staying in the kids' area and you guys are gonna be going to your own cottage. I was devastated.
According to Jim Jones, family bonds are selfish. But the truth is, he wants to turn family members against one another. And the best way to do that is to isolate them. Already, Tracy's father Gerald knows he's made a mistake. The next morning, while walking around the grounds, Gerald runs into his own cousin.
And she said, how do you like Jonestown? I said, I don't. That's all was said.
But the power Jim Jones has on his followers is already very strong. That night at the gathering, Gerald is called to the front. His cousin has told on him.
So my dad was up in front of all the people. One of the security guards came over and just started wailing on my dad. And I jumped out of my chair to go up there. And I yelled, get that bee off my dad. And this person grabbed me and said, if you know what was good for you, you would sit down.
Father cares. Father cares. You can tell in his voice he cares.
I had to act like I was one of them, but I never give up hope. I thought somehow, we'll get out of here.
But acting like everything is fine won't be easy, especially not for little Tracy. She discovers quickly that Jones forces his followers to work incredibly long hours. The day starts at 6 a.m. when the guards pass around yelling for people to wake up. Tracy jumps out of bed and runs to the breakfast table.
In the morning, rice and milk with bugs in it, and maybe for dinner we had rice and gravy.
After eating, Tracy would have to run to her post where she'd work the rest of the day, until dark. By nightfall, she would attend mandatory meetings of Jim Jones screaming and preaching for hours, most of the time spreading fear, talking about threats outside in the jungle.
I got a hell of a lot of weapons to fight. I got my claws, I got cutlasses, I got guns, I got dynamite, I got a hell of a lot to fight. I'll fight.
Listening to Jim Jones preach till whatever time in the morning he got done. Might be 2, might be 3. You'd get hit with a cane if you were falling asleep. The kids would just be laid all over the floor. They couldn't keep them awake.
And then there are the White Nights, the most terrifying meetings of all. To test the loyalty of his followers, Jim Jones forces everyone to drink a fruit punch that may or may not be poisoned.
Who in the hell wouldn't be ready for a white night? How do you feel about it? You may die tonight.
But Gerald Parks knows that for Jim Jones, this is a rehearsal.
I knew those white nights he was having was fake at the time, but I also knew that one day one of them would not be fake.
Since 1976, Jim Jones and his close crew have been buying cyanide in preparation for the mass murder of his followers. Gerald needs to act fast, but the Guyana forest is one of the most dangerous in South America. Jim Jones makes sure everyone knows this.
He would often throw that in our face. Go ahead and try. Go ahead and try to run through the jungle. The panthers and the snakes.
See if you can make it to any railway. See if you can get to any passport. Try. I dare you to try.
It's November 17th, 1978. Jim Jones tells his followers that Senator Ryan is coming. Jones wants to prevent a possible crisis. He takes certain precautions.
Prepping everybody mentally for you better not get out of hand. You better be on your best behavior.
I'm from the United States government, and we're here to inquire into the health and the welfare of American citizens who are here.
They had a big musical, singing, dancing, and everything to make him see how happy everybody was.
Whatever the comments are, there are some people here who believe that this is the best thing that ever happened to them in their whole life.
When hearing this speech, Tracy's heart drops. If Senator Ryan could be fooled, no one else would come and save them. November 18th, the following morning, Gerald and his mother Edith walk up straight to Senator Ryan to tell him the truth.
I said, we've been here 7.5 months. We want to go home. And he said, well, you'll be back in the United States today.
But Gerald isn't so sure. Other families begin to come forward as well. Soon, more than a dozen Temple members have stepped up with the Parks family, wanting to defect. Jim Jones confronts Gerald's family about their intention to leave, Gerald wearing the white and blue top, his daughter Brenda standing behind him. Although Jones is obviously shocked by the news, he doesn't make much of a scene.
I went into a state of shock, and I started crying. And I had my hat, and I was wiping my eyes. I was crying in utter fear.
Although Senator Ryan thinks he can get these people home safely, no one else is convinced. While the defectors are dragging their belongings onto the tractor that will take them out of Jonestown, chaos begins to spread.
You bring those kids back here! Hold on a second. You bring them back! One second. Don't you touch my kids!
They were calling us names. The lawyer asked me, said, what's really going on over here? And I said, the bastard's gonna kill us all. That's what's going on.
The road to the airstrip is 6 miles long and in horrible condition. Tension is on everyone's face, but no one says a word.
My wife was on the truck. Our eyes met, and I looked at her and she looked at me, and neither one of us said anything.
As they finally arrive at the landing strip in Port Kaituma, 33 people prepare to board 2 planes, splitting the Parks family. The camera is still rolling. You can see Gerald Parks approaching the plane with his family in tow. Then, behind them at the dirt road, a truck arrives with armed men. They were followed. The gunmen open fire. Right away, Patricia Parks is shot dead. 4 more people are killed on the airstrip, including NBC reporter Don Harris and Senator Ryan. The cameraman Bob Brown is also killed. Many more are gravely wounded. But Tracy is on the other plane with her brother Dale. Gerald doesn't know if they're alive.
I couldn't get my seatbelt off. I heard my mom holler, look at my wife Patty. If I looked back, she was sitting slumped over with her top of her head gone.
Finally, the shooting stops, and the truck drives away.
I just stood there for a few seconds, and it's like a bad dream, or this can't be happening. We were expecting at any moment for them to come back.
In the smaller plane, a man who pretended to be a defector has opened fire at point blank. After shooting one of the adults, he turns his gun toward Dale, Tracy's brother.
The sound went off, sounded like the bullet came out, and my brother's hands flew back. I got out of the plane and I flew down that airstrip. God gave me wings because I don't think I touched the ground.
Gerald sees Tracy running toward him. He means to shield Tracy from the horrible sight, but she's too fast.
I told myself she was faking, so they wouldn't shoot her anymore.
I knew that I had to get her to safety. So I headed the girls towards the jungle and said, go in there, don't go too far, go in there so you can't be seen, and wait till we call you.
We just started running straight out into the jungle.
As Gerald and his mother remain on the airstrip, Tracy, her sister Brenda, and 3 other kids are now by themselves.
We just ran so far because of the fears of Jones instilling in us, I'll find you, you escape.
See if you can make it to any railway. See if you can get to any passport. Try. I dare you to try.
So we thought he was probably looking for us.
Before night came, we went back to the jungle, started hollering for the kids. And no response. That's when my heart dropped, because I knew Guyana's one of the most dangerous jungles in the world.
When darkness falls, the kids find a bent-over tree to climb and spend the night. As the world around them turns pitch black, they hear gunshots.
We thought that it was them coming back to finish them off on the airstrip. We figured, okay, now Dad and them's gone, so now we don't have anybody. And that was the worst night I could ever recall in my life.
November 19th, day 2 in the jungle. Tracy starts to feel ill. Having nothing to eat or drink, her condition deteriorates rapidly. Her sister Brenda, being the eldest, does her best to keep the children moving, knowing that Jim Jones' men are probably out there looking for them. Night falls on the second day. A search helicopter flies overhead, probing the grounds with its light. The children find cover to avoid being seen. They can't risk going back to Jonestown. That night, Tracy develops a high fever. Everyone else starts to get sick as well.
And I remember just begging the creator of this universe to take me. The feeling of giving up was like a relief, that you didn't have to keep trying.
November 20th, day 3. All 5 children are laying sick and exhausted on the jungle floor. Brenda no longer has the strength to carry the group along, but she can't let her little sister Tracy down.
I just remember thinking that if we don't get out of here today, we're not going to get out at all. I heard this music out here in the middle of a jungle. Who or where would even be playing it? Where would it be coming from?
My sister hit me. She goes, "Get up."
It was like it had snapped me back to reality, which allowed me to think. And as soon as that happened, that music turned to the sound of a generator.
The group follows Brenda through the wilderness. Brenda hurries them to run between the trees, stopping at times to listen for the sound, then running again. After a long while, they see a group of armed men patrolling alongside a river.
I thought they were going to either help us or they're going to take us back to Jones, and I was too sick to care.
Police come and told me that the kids had been found. For the first time I had something to smile about.
Tracy and Brenda are reunited with their father, their grandmother, and their brother Dale, alive and well.
I knew when I saw him, I'm going home. I'm gonna be able to go home. And that was the first time I had ever really felt that since the day I had hit the gates to go in.
Although Tracy and her sister can finally breathe a sigh of relief, the joy of this heartfelt reunion is short-lived. They learn the details of what happened inside Jonestown the day of the attack. November 18th, 2 days earlier. At 4:30 p.m., Jim Jones calls the members of the People's Temple to assemble at the pavilion. The area is surrounded by armed guards. The meeting is recorded on audio tape.
Gather in, folks. It's easy. It's easy.
Jones has ordered for the cyanide to be mixed with the Kool-Aid. Then, he forces his followers to drink it.
If we can't live in peace, then let's die in peace.
The tape is 45 minutes long. In it, you can hear Jim Jones making outrageous claims, speaking of an army coming to torture them.
Plain as I know how to tell you, I've never lied to you. I never have lied to you.
When some of the members protest and wish to leave, he refuses.
No, you're not going. You're not going. You're not going.
Some members take the deadly drink willingly, while others are forced at gunpoint. The scene turns to chaos, and the recording becomes unbearable to hear.
Die with a degree of dignity. Lay down your life with dignity. Don't lay down with tears and agony. Don't be this way. Oh, God.
A total of 918 people are killed in Jonestown, the first of which was Patricia Parks, Tracy's mother.
I've looked at several pictures of my mom on that day. I'll never forget the look on her face. She was a loving person, She didn't deserve to die.
I didn't see her get shot, but I saw her brains in the plane, and I saw her laying out on the ground.
They shot the reporters on the ground, the congressman. They come from the pickup, the dump truck from the other side and got off and stuck the gun to their heads, point blank.
Kids have to go back to nothing without a mom, start life all over again. I was thinking about what I was going to have to live with the rest of my life.
The world is shook by what took place on November 18, 1978, but few lost more than Tracy Parks. All her life, she lived inside of the People's Temple, and at 12 years old, she now has to enter the real world without her mother there to help her.
I just drank because that's how I hid my pain as a teenager.
For all the survivors, demons from Jonestown show up in the years to come in different ways. A pattern of violence comes back too often. On October 24, 1983, Paula Jean Newstall and her child are shot dead by Lawrence E. Mann, the child's father. On February 24, 1984, Tyrone Mitchell opens fire on an elementary school in Los Angeles before ending his life. In 2014, Chris O'Neill, a boy who escaped with Tracy and Brenda in the forest, is shot down by police after a domestic dispute. But not all survivors turn to violence. Even after the tragic death of her sister Brenda in 2013, Tracy Parks remains a fighter, determined to honor her mother's memory.
This is harder than I thought.
30 years after Patricia Parks' death, her daughter Tracy returns to that airstrip. There, she lays down 5 roses, a picture of her mother, and a cross.
I just wanted to say goodbye.
As for Gerald, Tracy's father, he devotes his life to his family. After helping to raise his 2 granddaughters, he becomes a great-grandpa to 6 girls. His family means everything to him, and he always makes sure to put them first.
I think about my wife very often, whether she hears me or not, whether there's a hereafter or not. When I go to bed at night, I tell her I love her.
Gerald dies on November 1st, 2022. In Jonestown, there was a sign hung up on the wall. Those who forget the past are condemned to repeat it. Tracy didn't know what it meant back then, but today, this sign is the reason she shares her story. She says, "If I keep quiet, Jim Jones wins."
A tragedy of that magnitude affects you the rest of your life. Either you flail or you succeed. And I chose to succeed because I wanted my mom to be proud of me.
Emergency, which service?
The fire.
March 4th, 1980. The city of Stevenage, England, is rocked by an inferno at the house where Susan Lowson lives with her 4-year-old daughter, Amanda. A passing milkman rushes in and is able to rescue the child.